So I've heard lots of long lists, right? Things that can be done around collaboration, things that are going to be done in terms of accommodations, embedded supports in the assessment system, ways to adjust instruction, and a couple thoughts come to mind. First, so many ideas, right? Where do we start, particularly when I don't think too many districts and states have a heck of a lot of money right now? So where do we start with the implementation process? And let's start at the district level. Paul?
I think you start with the student. I think we always start with the student. And I think when we start to look at individual needs, that's what's going to be important. As a district administrator, I am responsible for budget. You're talking about resources. I mean, I am concerned when we talk about adaptive technology. Yes, I may have adaptive technology for my students with disabilities, but I may have one item that students share. And if we're going to have students taking assessments, I might need to have more of that equipment. So down the road, I do have to certainly consider the budget implementation and the concerns that go along with that. That being said, as we listen to all of this, we're looking at how do we instruct students. And so it's the conversations that we have as we roll this out. We have them at the curriculum level. I have a curriculum team in my district that reviews our curriculum on a 5-year rotation, but we took that out of turn this last year and looked at all of our curriculums to see how we could align them from one content area to another so that we could maximize instruction. It didn't make sense that we were doing American literature in 9th grade, but world history in that same grade. Perhaps we should be doing American history at the same time we're doing American literature, and that gives us more opportunity to collaborate and to team and to create a richer learning experience for our students. That's something we can do right away. I think we need to be looking at, if we're talking about students with disabilities, we need to be looking at the team meeting process. One of the concerns I have, the responsibilities that I'm going to have, is making sure that parents understand how the curriculum is shifting and how the assessment particularly is shifting. Because the team is what's responsible for designing that individualized education program for that student, and the parent is supposed to be an equal voice on that team. And so the parent needs to understand what type of assessment we're preparing the student for to make sure that they can have a voice. But also when we look at these accommodations and modifications that we've all been talking about, we have to choose ones that the students are using on a consistent basis. We shouldn't be introducing new accommodations to students for an assessment that they're not familiar with. These need to be the types of accommodations that they use throughout their learning experience. And so we have to be thoughtful. What are the things, what are the strategies we're using in the classroom to help our students be successful? And then how do those translate to the assessment that's going to measure their outcomes and make sure that there's a seamless connection between those?
Bonnie, where do we start?
Sure. So I'm going to start from the standards themselves because they really are different kinds of standards. And when you look at, in particular, the level of integration, whether it's the content with the mathematical practices or whether it's integrating speaking and listening and reading and writing all in the same performance-based classroom task, you realize that the standards call for a rigor that may be somewhat different from what teachers have been doing at particular grade levels. Some of the content, even the words in the standards themselves, the word argument is a word, for example, that if you're a 7th grade teacher, you may not really know the history of how to teach argument. That's a really, there's a lot of information out there on how to do that, but it's something that you have to dive in deep and just take on and learn. So because the English language arts and literacy standards really are standards that are applied across the curriculum, having opportunities for people to dive in deep and see what is there that I recognize that is the same as what I'm doing. And there will be things that are the same. We're going to teach poetry, and we've always taught poetry. But what we're going to teach about that poetry might be different grade level to grade level. How we're going to teach it might be different because the content has changed. The type of poems have changed. Maybe I'm not teaching Shel Silverstein in 3rd grade, but I've done it every year for the last 10 years. I might be teaching something that's maybe a little more rigorous and therefore requires some other kinds of strategies. So looking closely at the standards, what do the standards tell us needs to happen from a content perspective, and then asking, what are the ways I can provide opportunities for all the different types of students that walk through my door? And we're talking here about equity and issues in ELL and students with disabilities, but we might just as easily have a conversation about how to get boys to be more interested in reading, given the current standards that we have put in place. And we might just as easily talk about a particular group of students, that reader-text connection, which is so important. So knowing your students, absolutely, and that intersection between who do I have in front of me and what do these standards demand, and matching that up across the curriculum. A heavy lift, but an enjoyable and exciting one.
Thanks, Bonnie. Barbara?
Well, I would follow with Bonnie. It's about the standards, and the best way to meet the needs of all those students is for us to truly understand the standards, understand the shifts, realize that this is not what I hear around sometimes is, oh, okay, so this math content is now in 5th grade, it used to be in 6th grade, so this is what the standards are about. As we know, it's about so much more. It's really philosophy change in how mathematics is taught, and in order to maximize your ability to work with all these different populations, you need to be able to know these shifts. You need to be able to know the mathematics in a level that was not necessarily required before. We talked yesterday about answer getting versus learning mathematics. And answer getting is a lot easier because there's a lot of tricks you can use, a lot of mnemonics, and so that's not what these standards are about. This is about actually conceptually understanding the mathematics and how it builds on each other, and understanding the coherence of it. It's the beauty of mathematics, right? Some people say mathematics is the language that aliens would know because everyone should understand it. And yet we're in a country that people don't. Many half the cocktail party will say, oh, I'm not good at mathematics. It should be. It should be clear. It makes sense. But this is going to take time to really understand. And as Bonnie said, with certain aspects of ELA, some of that's going to take professional development. It's going to take learning on your part to say, I really need to know more about that particular topic, so that way I can be a better teacher to my students.
So I'm hearing a theme developing, right? It's the team getting to know the kid, and it's the team getting to know the standards, and then figuring out where that intersection is around the accommodations and support structures, including assistive technologies where it makes sense.
Exactly.
Trinell, would you like to add?
Yeah, what I would say is, I remember when I was a principal, I would always ask my teachers, do you believe that all means all? Do you believe in your heart? Do you have the vision? Do you have the belief? Because I think we're dealing with belief systems here. Do you really believe that all students can achieve grade level standards? Do you believe that? And are you willing to do the work that's required? Which may be coming to your principal as a teacher saying, you know, this is an area that I'm really weak in, that I need some more PD, but owning your professional development as a teacher. So I think we're dealing with beliefs. The other piece I think that's important is for teachers and principals and district level personnel to really recognize what are those gaps in achievement for students with disabilities or English language learners, looking at their proficiency levels, and what are those interventions, research-based and evidence-based practices that are really going to close that gap for our students, but really understanding what those skills are in a Common Core state standards. But making sure that in addition to that core instruction, like Bonnie said earlier, they have to be exposed to grade level text. We can no longer give them below grade level text and be able to meet those rigorous content standards. But they have to be exposed, but we also have to make sure that we're giving supports and interventions that are research-based, that have been tried out, that we know that are working, that will be able to bridge that gap. And so looking at district level resources, I thought your point about how you looked at your curriculum was very important, that we have to start doing more of that, because I think there may be supports and interventions that we're using in our schools that really are not meaningful to our students or our program. And so really doing that needs assessment of what we currently have, I think, is key in bridging this gap for achievement.
Okay, following them, I'm not going to come up with anything new and wildly creative, so I'll just spin off on that. And maybe I'll go back down memory road here. Our classrooms are changing. correct? The students in there are not the same students we had 20, 30 years ago. And it's really important we know how to work with the students we now have in front of us. And as I go back to my teacher prep days, I didn't have to take courses on working with special ed students or ELLs, which is funny, that's the field I'm in now. And so we do need that information. So when we say use these great research-based strategies, yes, what are they? And the standards are critical. If we're not all working from that same document, then we're really working separately and back into isolation again. If you go and look at the standards, there is a very small section on working with special ed populations as well as ELLs. But it says the standards don't tell you how to do it. And so that's where professional development is so critical. We are in an era of teacher accountability. Student test scores really count a lot. Classroom observations are important, talking about multiple measures, showing different ways for students to demonstrate their understanding of the content as well as showing growth. Well, teachers need to show growth as well. And that's where working together collaboratively, teachers, administrators, or through their teams, they can identify through the assessments, the formative assessments that are used with the students, areas of professional growth. Okay, I see where students need to grow, I see what they're lacking, but I have to turn around and figure out how I'm going to fill that gap. And how will I do that? And that's going to be professional development. I really feel it goes there. And as a lot of monies are expended in education through districts, unfortunately, it always stops professional development as many staff, teachers have been let go, administrators, downsizing, yet class sizes are rising. There's never enough money for professional development. I think districts really need to reevaluate that because teachers are learners. All educators in the school are learners, and they're all working together. And to meet the needs, not just the diverse learners, and I know we're on that panel, but all students, we really need to work together, but have that information of how to do that together.
Bonnie?
I just want to piggyback on something that Trinell shared about interventions. It comes up a great deal when talking about reading. One of the key shifts is that understanding that interventions are supplemental to the core, they don't replace it.
Exactly.
And that is such an important concept, that we don't take students out of core instruction to provide reading-based or mathematics-based interventions. We provide the core instruction, grade-level content, grade-level text, grade-level mathematics and practice, and if students have gaps, and I agree 100%, we need to know where those gaps are, then we supplement that core with research-based or evidence-based interventions. And that, so as a principal, figuring out how to time that in a day that's already too short. So it's complex, but nonetheless absolutely necessary.
So just a side note here that I think Susan makes a great point about, yeah, okay, I'll use research-based strategies, and what are they exactly? And there's been a lot said about different approaches to getting started, but where are the resources? Where's the good professional development, right? Not just professional development. And one of the things that the NIMSY staff has been doing, the Achieve staff has been doing, is collecting all of these resources. So you're going to get an email later today pointing you to a few of these so you can get started on them. We're also going to be following up and gathering resources from the Cohort 1 panel that provided some really nice websites for folks to start digging into, so you have something to hold on to. So why don't we give the panel a round of applause.